In the rugged expanse of the valley, where jagged peaks pierced the sky and the air held a biting chill, Elara Whitfield stood at the threshold of her modest cabin, surveying the landscape. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the terrain, and the vibrant hues of orange and red painted the sky with a beauty that belied the harshness of the world around her. Life in the frontier was a constant battle against the elements, but it was a life she had come to embrace, finding solace in the solitude and simplicity of her existence. Elara was known in her small community for her kindness and resilience. The daughter of a rancher who had succumbed to the unforgiving winters, she had learned to navigate the challenges of survival on her own. With each passing day, she honed her skills, hunting, foraging, and tending to her animals, while also keeping an eye out for those in need. It was a reputation she wore with pride, even as whispers circulated about the dangers that lurked beyond the valley's borders. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded, a rustle in the underbrush caught her attention. Elara squinted into the growing darkness, her heart quickening as she spotted a figure stumbling through the thicket. A man, gaunt and weary, emerged from the shadows, his clothes torn and dirt-streaked. His face was etched with desperation, and his eyes, wide with fear, locked onto hers. "Please," he gasped, collapsing to his knees before her, "I need help." Elara's instincts kicked in. She rushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What happened? Who are you?" "My name's Nolan Graves," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I'm being hunted. They're coming for me." The urgency in his tone sent a chill down her spine. Elara glanced around, her mind racing. The valley was a haven for those seeking refuge, but it was also a place where danger could descend without warning. "You need to come inside," she urged, extending her hand to help him rise. "Quickly." As she guided him into her cabin, Elara felt the weight of his fear pressing down on her. She locked the door behind them and turned to face him, her heart still racing. "What do you mean you're being hunted?" Nolan took a moment to catch his breath, his eyes darting around the small space. "I was part of a group that went too far into the mountains," he explained, his voice trembling. "We crossed paths with a rival gang, and things went south. I barely escaped, but they're relentless."
"They'll come looking for me." Elara's mind raced. The stories of ruthless riders roaming the mountains were well known, and she had heard whispers of their brutality. "How many are after you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. 280 riders, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're led by a man named Barrett Cole. They won't stop until they find me." The realization of what she was facing settled heavily on her shoulders. The valley, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a cage with the potential for imminent danger. Elara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "You can stay here for the night, but we need to figure out a plan." Nolan nodded, gratitude flooding his features. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without your help." As the two settled into a quiet routine, Elara prepared a simple meal from her sparse supplies. They shared their stories, the warmth of the fire illuminating their faces as they spoke. Nolan's tales of the mountains captivated her, painting vivid pictures of the landscapes beyond the valley. Yet beneath his words, Elara sensed the weight of his past, the fear, the loss, and the uncertainty that hung in the air like a thick fog. Hours passed, and as the fire crackled, Elara found herself drawn to Nolan's presence. He was not just a fugitive, he was a man with a story, one that resonated with her own struggles and dreams. Yet the reality of his situation loomed large in her mind. The riders would come, and the consequences of her kindness weighed heavily on her conscience. As the night wore on, a sense of foreboding settled over the cabin. Elara could not shake the feeling that her act of compassion would lead to unforeseen repercussions. She glanced out the window, the moonlight casting an eerie glow over the valley, and her heart raced at the thought of the riders closing in. The following morning dawned with a heavy silence that enveloped the valley. Ilara awoke to the sound of distant hoofbeats echoing through the canyons, a sound that sent a jolt of fear through her. She quickly dressed and moved to the window, peering out into the crisp morning air. What she saw made her blood run cold. Riders, hundreds of them. They filled the canyon exits, their silhouettes stark against the rising sun. The sight was overwhelming, a sea of horses and men, all converging on her sanctuary.
Ilara's heart raced as she realized the gravity of her decision to help Nolan. The valley, once a place of solace, now felt like a trap. "Nolan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "they're here." He rushed to her side, his eyes widening as he took in the scene outside. "We need to hide. They'll come for me." Ilara shook her head, her mind racing. "If we run, they'll know we're here. We need to stay put and figure out what they want." Nolan's face was a mask of fear and uncertainty. "What if they're here to kill me? I can't let them find me." Ilara placed a hand on his arm, trying to calm his racing heart. "We'll figure this out together. Just trust me." As the riders dismounted and began to spread out, Ilara felt the weight of their scrutiny. They were assessing the valley, searching for any sign of their quarry. Among them, a figure emerged, tall and imposing, with a commanding presence that drew the attention of the others. Barrett Cole, the leader, scanned the area with a fierce intensity, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the cabin. Ilara's heart sank. The riders were not here for a simple confrontation. They were here to test the character of those who resided in the valley. She could feel the tension thickening in the air, a palpable sense of danger that wrapped around her like a shroud. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her, and she realized that her actions from the previous night had put both her and Nolan in grave peril. Days passed in a tense standoff, the riders encircling the valley and keeping watch over the cabin. Ilara tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, tending to her chores while the threat loomed large. But the presence of the riders was a constant reminder of the choices she had made. Each day she felt the weight of their scrutiny, and with it the growing anxiety of what would come next. Nolan remained on edge, his fear palpable as he paced the small cabin. "They're watching us," he said, his voice low. "I can feel it. They're waiting for something." Ilara nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. "We need to be cautious. If they sense any weakness, they'll strike." As the days turned into nights, Ilara found herself grappling with the moral implications of her choice to help Nolan. She learned more about his past, the circumstances that had led him to flee into the mountains, and the harsh realities of life in a world where survival often meant making impossible decisions. Nolan spoke of the gangs that roamed the frontier, the violence that erupted over territory and resources, and the constant struggle to find a place to belong. Meanwhile, Barrett Cole began to take a personal interest in Ilara. He approached her one evening as she tended to her garden, his demeanor both intimidating and strangely charismatic. "You've shown kindness to a man who is not worth saving," he said, his voice low and measured. "You must understand the risks you're taking." Ilara met his gaze, her heart racing. "He's a man in need. I couldn't turn him away." Barrett studied her for a moment, his expression inscrutable. "Compassion is a luxury in these parts. It can lead to your downfall." Ilara felt a chill run down her spine. She could sense the underlying threat in his words, a warning that her actions had consequences far beyond her understanding. Yet, she refused to back down. "I won't abandon someone who needs help," she replied defiantly. Barrett's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you'll regret that choice." As the days passed, the riders maintained their vigil, and the tension in the valley grew. Ilara found herself increasingly aware of the stakes at play. Each moment felt like a test, a challenge to her character and resolve. She could sense that the riders were waiting for a reason to act, and the pressure mounted with each passing day. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, and Ilara struggled to maintain her composure. She had opened her home to a man in need, but now she feared that her kindness would lead to her undoing. The weight of her decision loomed large, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. As the sun began to set on another day, Ilara stood at the window, her heart heavy with dread. The valley, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. The riders were not just a threat to Nolan, they were a threat to everything she held dear. In that moment, Ilara knew she had to make a choice. She could continue to hide, to wait for the storm to pass, or she could stand up for what she believed in, even if it meant risking everything. The air was thick with tension, and the weight of her decision pressed down on her like a heavy burden. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, and Ilara could only hope that her choice would lead to a path of honor rather than despair. The valley, with all its beauty and danger, was about to reveal its true nature. Ilara stood at the window of her modest cabin, the fading light casting long shadows across the rugged valley. The once familiar landscape now felt foreign, tainted by the presence of the riders who loomed just beyond the tree line. She could feel their eyes on her, watching her every move, assessing her intentions. Each day had become a test of her resolve, and the weight of her decision to help Nolan Graves pressed heavily on her shoulders. The morning had started like any other, but the tension in the air was palpable. Ilara went about her chores, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She tended to her garden, the vibrant colors of the flowers stark against the dull browns and greens of the surrounding wilderness. Yet, as she dug her hands into the soil, her mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of Nolan and the riders. She could hear the distant sounds of hooves, the low murmur of voices, and the rustle of the wind through the trees, all reminding her that danger was ever present. Nolan had taken refuge in her cabin, a quiet shadow in the corner, his presence both a comfort and a source of anxiety. He was a man marked by fear, his weary eyes reflecting the weight of his past. They had shared stories during the long nights, and Ilara had learned of the gang that hunted him. They were ruthless, driven by vengeance and a thirst for blood. Nolan's escape had been a narrow one, and Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that his past would soon catch up to him, and to her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange hue across the valley, Ilara caught sight of a group of riders approaching. Panic surged through her as she turned to Nolan, who was peering out from the shadows of the cabin, his expression a mix of fear and determination. The riders were not just a handful, they were a formidable force, a wave of dust and menace that threatened to engulf her home. Barrett Cole, the leader of the riders, was at the forefront, his imposing figure cutting through the twilight like a blade. Ilara's heart raced as she watched him dismount, the other riders following suit, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hats. She could sense the tension in the air, a charged silence that seemed to vibrate with the unsaid words hanging between them. "Stay here," Ilara whispered to Nolan, her voice barely a breath. He nodded, but the fear in his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. She stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapping around her like a shroud. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to hide, but she knew she had to face them. Barrett approached with a slow, deliberate gait, his gaze piercing as it settled on Ilara. "You've been quite the topic of conversation, Miss Whitfield," he said, his voice smooth yet laced with an edge that sent chills down her spine. "Your kindness to our friend here has not gone unnoticed." Ilara squared her shoulders, refusing to let her fear show. "Nolan needed help. I couldn't turn him away." Barrett's lips curled into a faint smile, but it felt more like a threat than an expression of amusement. "Compassion is a dangerous game out here. You must know that by now." He glanced over his shoulder at the riders, who stood like sentinels, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Why are you here?" Ilara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you want?" "We want to understand," Barrett replied, his tone deceptively calm. "You see, we don't take kindly to those who harbor fugitives. It disrupts the order of things." He stepped closer, the space between them charged with tension. "And we don't take kindly to those who make choices without considering the consequences." Illyra felt her heart race, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew what he was implying. Nolan's presence in her cabin had put her directly in the crosshairs of danger. "I won't betray him," she said, defiantly, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. Barrett's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it was replaced by a calculating look. "You're a brave woman, Illyra, but bravery can lead to foolishness." He glanced back at the riders, who shifted restlessly, waiting for their leader's command. "We're not here to fight, yet. We're simply observing. But know this, your actions have consequences, and we will be watching." With that, he turned on his heel, striding back towards his men. Illyra stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stood her ground, but at what cost? The riders were not just a threat to Nolan, they were a threat to her very way of life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the valley into darkness, Illyra returned to the cabin. Nolan was waiting inside, his face pale and drawn. "What did he want?" he asked, his voice trembling. "He wanted to understand," Illyra replied, her voice heavy with the weight of her words. "He warned me about the consequences of my actions."
Nolan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his movements. "I didn't want to bring this trouble to you. I thought I could find a way to escape them on my own." "You were wrong," Illyra said sharply, the fear bubbling beneath the surface. "You can't face them alone. They're too powerful." Nolan's gaze dropped to the floor, guilt etched on his features. "I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I never meant to endanger you." Illyra sighed, torn between her compassion for him and the reality of their situation. "You didn't ask for this, but we're in it together now. We need to figure out what to do next." Days passed in an agonizing cycle of tension and uncertainty. The riders remained camped in the valley, their presence a constant reminder of the danger that loomed over them. Illyra tried to carry on with her daily tasks, but every sound made her jump. The hooves of the riders echoed in her mind, a reminder of their watchful eyes. Nolan had grown increasingly withdrawn, the weight of his past pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. Illyra could see the toll it was taking, and her heart ached for him. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but the fear of their situation held her back. They were both trapped in a web of uncertainty, and Illyra knew that the time for action was drawing near. One evening, as they sat together in the dim light of the cabin, Nolan finally spoke. "I can't stay here forever. I need to find a way out, for both of us." Illyra looked at him, her heart racing. "What do you mean? You can't just leave me here with them." "I won't put you in danger any longer," he replied, determination hardening his features. "If I can draw them away, it might give you the chance to escape." Illyra shook her head vehemently. "No, I won't let you do that. We need to stick together. There's strength in numbers." Nolan's expression softened, and he reached for her hand. "I appreciate your bravery, Illyra, but this isn't just about us anymore. If I can buy you time, I have to try." Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes as she felt the gravity of their situation. "But what if something happens to you? I can't bear the thought of losing you." "You won't lose me," he promised, his voice firm yet gentle. "I'll find a way back to you. I just need you to trust me." Illyra hesitated, the weight of his words settling heavily in her heart. She wanted to trust him, to believe that he could find a way out of this nightmare. But the reality of the rider's power loomed large, and she feared that his plan could lead to disaster. As the days turned into a week, the tension in the valley reached a boiling point. Illyra could feel the riders' scrutiny intensifying, their patience wearing thin.
She sensed that Barrett was preparing to make a move, and the thought filled her with dread. One afternoon, as Alara gathered water from the nearby stream, she caught sight of Barrett standing at the edge of the trees, watching her. A shiver ran down her spine as their eyes met. There was something predatory in his gaze, a reminder that he was always lurking just out of sight. "Miss Whitfield," he called out, his voice smooth but laced with an underlying threat. "We need to have a word." Alara's heart raced as she approached him cautiously. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've been patient," Barrett said, his tone shifting to one of authority. "But patience has its limits. I need to know where Nolan is hiding." Alara's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't betray him, not after everything they had been through together. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, forcing her voice to remain calm. Barrett stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You're playing a dangerous game, Alara. I suggest you reconsider your position before it's too late." Alara held his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I won't betray him. He deserves a chance, just like anyone else." Barrett's expression darkened, and for a moment, Alara feared he might lash out. But instead, he merely chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "You're a brave woman, but bravery doesn't always lead to survival. Remember that." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alara shaken but resolute. She knew the stakes had never been higher, and the time for action was drawing near. She had to protect Nolan, even if it meant risking everything. As night fell over the valley, Alara and Nolan huddled together in the cabin, the flickering light of the fire casting shadows on the walls. They spoke in hushed tones, strategizing their next move. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. "We can't stay here much longer," Nolan said. "We need to find a way out before they make their move." Alara nodded, her heart racing. "But how? They block every exit. We can't just walk into their camp."
Nolan thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "If we can create a diversion, it might give us a chance to slip away unnoticed." Ilara's eyes widened as she considered the implications. "What kind of diversion?" "I could draw them out," he suggested, a determined glint in his eye. "If I can make enough noise, it might lure them away from the cabin long enough for you to escape." "No!" Ilara exclaimed, panic rising in her chest. "You can't do that! It's too dangerous!" "I have to try," he insisted, his voice firm. "You deserve to be safe, and I can't let them keep you in this nightmare." Tears filled her eyes as she realized the depth of his sacrifice. "But what if something happens to you? I can't lose you, Nolan." "You won't lose me," he promised, taking her hands in his. "I'll find a way back to you. Just trust me." Ilara felt the weight of his words settle in her heart, a mix of fear and admiration swirling within her. She wanted to trust him, to believe that he could find a way out of this nightmare. But the reality of the rider's power loomed large, and she feared that his plan could lead to disaster. As the night deepened, they made their plans, the air thick with uncertainty. Ilara knew that the following day would bring a reckoning, and the valley, with all its beauty and danger, was about to reveal its true nature. Ilara awoke to the sound of rustling outside the cabin, the noise pulling her from the depths of a restless sleep. The fire had died down to embers, casting a dim glow that barely illuminated the cramped space. She turned to see Nolan still asleep, his brow furrowed, as if caught in a troubled dream. The reality of their situation weighed heavily on her, and she knew that the day ahead would not bring the peace she longed for. As she quietly moved to the window, she peered out into the early morning light. The valley, usually bathed in the soft hues of dawn, felt different today. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick and oppressive. The birds that typically filled the morning with their songs were conspicuously absent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ilara's heart raced as she thought about the riders, their presence looming over her like a dark cloud. The plan they had devised the night before echoed in her mind.
Nolan's idea to create a diversion was reckless, but it was the only option they had. She had argued against it, her fear for his safety overwhelming her logic. But Nolan had insisted, his determination shining through the fear in his eyes. She had reluctantly agreed, knowing that they had to act before the riders made their move. As she turned back to Nolan, she felt a wave of affection mixed with apprehension. He was a man caught in a web of danger, and yet he had shown her kindness when she had every reason to turn away. The thought of him risking his life for her safety made her heart ache. She needed to protect him, not just for her own sake, but because he had become someone she cared about deeply. "Wake up," she whispered, gently shaking him. "It's time." Nolan stirred, blinking against the morning light. "What time is it?" he mumbled, still groggy. "Early," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "We need to prepare. Today could be the day we make our move." He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Have you seen anything outside?" "Not yet," she said, glancing back out the window. "But I can feel it. Something's coming." Nolan nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. They shared a moment of silence, both lost in their thoughts about the riders and what lay ahead. Ilara felt a surge of determination as she recalled the resolve that had brought them to this point. They had to fight for their lives, and they had to do it together. After a quick breakfast of stale bread and dried meat, they gathered their few belongings. Ilara took a moment to look around the cabin, her heart heavy. This place had been a sanctuary for her, a refuge from the harshness of the world outside. But now it felt like a trap, and she was determined not to let it become their tomb. "Are you ready?" Nolan asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, forcing a smile despite the fear gnawing at her insides. They stepped outside, and the chill of the morning air hit them like a wave. The valley was eerily quiet, the silence amplifying their footsteps as they made their way toward the edge of the clearing. Ilara scanned the horizon, her heart racing as she searched for any sign of the riders. Suddenly, the distant sound of hooves echoed through the valley, sending a shiver down her spine. Nolan's expression darkened as he turned to her, his eyes wide with fear. "They're coming." Ilara's stomach dropped as she realized the riders were not just a distant threat, they were closing in. "We need to hide," she urged, her voice urgent. "No," Nolan said, determination flaring in his eyes. "We can't just wait for them to find us. We have to act first." Ilara hesitated, torn between her instinct to escape and Nolan's fierce resolve. "What do you suggest?" "We create the diversion," he said, his voice steady. "I'll draw them away from the cabin. You'll have a chance to slip out while they're distracted." "No!" Ilara exclaimed, panic rising in her chest. "It's too dangerous. I won't let you do this alone." Nolan took her hands in his grip firm yet gentle. "You have to trust me, Ilara. This is our only chance. If I can get them to follow me, you might have enough time to get to the other side of the valley. You can find help." Tears filled her eyes as she fought against the wave of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "What if you don't come back? I can't lose you, Nolan. I won't survive it." He cupped her face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. "You have to think about your safety. I'll find a way back to you, I promise. Just trust me." Ilara's heart ached at the thought of him putting himself in danger for her sake. She nodded slowly, knowing deep down that he was right. They were running out of time, and they needed to act. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you have to be careful." "I will," Nolan promised, his expression softening. "I'll be back before you know it." With a final, lingering glance, they shared a moment of unspoken understanding. Ilara stepped back, her heart heavy with the weight of their impending separation. She watched as Nolan moved toward the trees, his figure blending into the shadows. As he disappeared from view, Ilara felt a rush of fear and determination. She quickly gathered her belongings, her heart racing as she prepared to make her escape. The sound of hooves grew louder, and she knew she didn't have much time. With one last look toward the direction Nolan had gone, she took a deep breath and began to move. She navigated through the dense underbrush, her heart pounding in her chest as she made her way toward the edge of the valley. The world around her felt alive with tension, the air thick with the promise of confrontation. As she reached a vantage point overlooking the valley, Ilara crouched low, her breath coming in quick bursts. The sight before her sent a chill down her spine. The riders were gathered in a tight formation, their horses snorting and stamping as they awaited their leader's command. Barrett Cole stood at the forefront, his presence commanding and intimidating. Ilara's heart raced as she realized the full extent of their numbers. There were indeed 280 riders, a formidable force that could easily overwhelm anyone who dared to challenge them. She felt a wave of despair wash over her, but she quickly pushed it aside. She had to focus on Nolan and the plan they had devised. Suddenly, a loud shout broke the silence, and Ilara's heart lurched as she saw Nolan emerge from the trees. He was running, his figure darting through the brush, and the riders immediately turned their attention toward him. "Now," Ilara whispered to herself, her heart pounding as she prepared to move. She had to seize this opportunity. Nolan's voice rang out, echoing through the valley as he shouted provocations at the riders, daring them to chase him. Ilara watched in awe as he expertly drew their attention away from her, his movements quick and calculated. The riders began to stir, their horses shifting restlessly as they processed the sudden change in focus. Ilara felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that Nolan was now in grave danger. "Come on," she urged herself, forcing her legs to move as she slipped away from her hiding spot. She needed to find a way to escape while the riders were distracted. As she made her way through the thicket, the sounds of hooves pounding the ground filled her ears. Ilara's heart raced as she navigated the underbrush, trying to remain as quiet as possible. She could hear the riders shouting, their voices filled with anger and excitement as they pursued Nolan. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a small stream, its water glistening in the sunlight. The sound of rushing water provided a brief moment of solace, and she paused to catch her breath. But there was no time to waste. She had to keep moving. Ilara crossed the stream, her feet splashing in the cold water as she continued to push forward. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, propelling her onward even as her heart ached for Nolan. He was risking everything for her, and she couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. As she reached the other side, she heard the distant sound of horses approaching. Panic surged through her as she realized the riders were drawn closer. She ducked behind a cluster of bushes, her heart pounding in her chest as she listened intently. "Did you see where he went?" one of the riders shouted. "No, but we can't let him get away," another replied, urgency lacing his voice. Ilara held her breath, praying they wouldn't discover her hiding place. The tension in the air was thick, and she could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on her. "Split up!" Barrett's commanding voice rang out, sending a chill down her spine. "We'll cover more ground that way. He can't have gone far." Ilara's heart sank as she realized the riders were now searching for Nolan. She needed to find him, to ensure he was safe. But the thought of exposing herself to the riders filled her with dread. Suddenly, she heard a loud crash nearby, followed by Nolan's voice. "Get back, you cowards!" Ilara's heart raced as she recognized the sound of a struggle. She could hear the riders shouting, their voices filled with rage. Without thinking, she pushed through the underbrush, her instincts guiding her toward the commotion. As she emerged into a small clearing, her breath caught in her throat. Nolan was surrounded by several riders, their horses blocking his escape. He fought valiantly, but the odds were against him. Ilara felt a surge of fear and anger as she realized he was outnumbered. "Get away from him!" she shouted, her voice ringing out with unexpected strength. The riders turned to face her, surprise etched on their faces. Nolan's eyes widened as he saw her, a mixture of relief and concern washing over him. "Ilara, no! Get back!" But she couldn't retreat, not now. She had to stand by him, to show her loyalty in the face of danger. The riders shifted their attention toward her, their expressions hardening. "You shouldn't have come here, girl," Barrett said, stepping forward. You're only making this worse for yourself." Ilara's heart raced as she faced Barrett, her resolve unwavering. "I won't let you hurt him. He's done nothing wrong." Barrett's gaze narrowed, and for a moment, Ilara feared he might lash out. But instead, he regarded her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "You think you can protect him? You don't understand the world you're living in." "I understand enough," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "You're not here for justice. You're here for vengeance, and I won't let you take him." Nolan looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes, but Ilara also saw the worry etched across his face. He was about to speak when Barrett interrupted. "Bravery doesn't always lead to survival, girl." "You're playing a dangerous game," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Maybe," Ilara shot back, her heart pounding in her chest, "but I refuse to stand by while you destroy an innocent man's life." Barrett's expression darkened, and the tension in the air crackled with electricity. Ilara could feel the weight of the riders' gaze upon her, their anticipation palpable. She knew she was risking everything, but she couldn't back down now. "Let him go," she demanded, her voice unwavering. "You can't justify this violence. It won't bring you peace." Barrett chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "You're naive, girl. You think your words can change anything? You're just a pawn in a game far beyond your understanding." Ilara's heart raced as she realized the depth of the conflict they were facing. She was standing up against a ruthless leader in his gang, and the stakes had never been higher. But she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. "Maybe," I replied, her voice steady, "but I refuse to let you take him from me. I believe in honor, and I believe in standing up for what's right." Barrett's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Ilara feared he would strike, but instead he regarded her with a newfound respect. "You're a brave one, I'll give you that, but bravery alone won't keep you safe." As the tension hung in the air, Ilara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps her words had reached him, even if just a little. She glanced at Nolan, who was watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Stay close to me," she whispered to him, her heart racing. "We'll get through this together." But even as she spoke, she knew the danger was far from over. The riders were still a formidable force, and their intentions remained unclear. Ilara steeled herself for the confrontation ahead, knowing that the choices they made today would shape their fate in ways they could not yet comprehend. Ilara stood her ground, her heart racing as Barrett Cole's gaze bore into her. The air was thick with tension, and the silence felt deafening. She could sense the riders shifting, their anticipation palpable, as they awaited their leader's next move. Ilara's resolve hardened. She would not back down. Barrett's expression was inscrutable, a mix of admiration and menace. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, "but guts won't save you from the consequences of your choices." He stepped closer, his presence imposing. "You think you can protect him? You think your words mean anything in this world?" Ilara's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to respond. "I believe in honor, Barrett. I believe in standing up for what's right. You don't have to do this. There's a way to resolve this without bloodshed." Barrett chuckled softly, the sound devoid of warmth. "You're a dreamer, girl, but dreams don't keep you alive." He turned slightly, gesturing to the riders behind him. "Do you see them? They're not here for a debate. They're here for blood. And you've put yourself in the line of fire by protecting him." Nolan, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice trembling but resolute. "I'm the one they want, Barrett. Let her go. This is between you and me." Barrett's eyes narrowed, and he shifted his attention to Nolan. "You think you can bargain for her life? You're mistaken. You've brought this upon her by seeking refuge here. You should have known better than to run into the mountains without a plan." Ilara felt a surge of anger at Barrett's words. "This isn't about vengeance, it's about justice. You're hunting a man who was forced into a life he never wanted. You're punishing him for surviving." Barrett's expression darkened, and for a moment Ilara feared he might strike. But instead, he regarded her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? But in the end, it's all just a game of survival, and you're playing a losing hand." The riders shifted restlessly, their eyes darting between Barrett and Ilara. The tension was suffocating, and Ilara could feel the weight of their scrutiny. She knew she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for Nolan as well. "Then let's make this a fair game," she proposed, surprising even herself with her boldness. "If you want him, then you'll have to go through me first. I won't let you take him without a fight." Barrett raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her defiance. "You're willing to put your life on the line for him? For a man you barely know?" "I know enough," Ilara replied, her voice steady. "I know he deserves a chance to live. We all do. This valley doesn't belong to you, Barrett. You may have the numbers, but you don't have the right." Barrett studied her for a long moment, and Ilara could see the gears turning in his mind. "You're brave, girl, but bravery doesn't always lead to survival. You're a pawn in a game far beyond your understanding." Ilara's heart raced as she realized the depth of the conflict they were facing. She was standing up against a ruthless leader and his gang, and the stakes had never been higher. But she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. "Maybe I'm naive," she replied, her voice steady, "but I refuse to let you take him from me. I believe in honor, and I believe in standing up for what is right." Barrett's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ilara feared he would strike. But instead, he regarded her with a newfound respect. "You're a brave one, I'll give you that. But bravery alone won't keep you safe." As the tension hung in the air, Ilara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps her words had reached him, even if just a little. She glanced at Nolan, who was watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Stay close to me," she whispered to him, her heart racing. "We'll get through this together." But even as she spoke, she knew the danger was far from over. The riders were still a formidable force, and their intentions remained unclear. Ilara steeled herself for the confrontation ahead, knowing that the choices they made today would shape their fate in ways they could not yet comprehend. Days passed under the watchful eyes of the riders. Ilara and Nolan remained in the cabin, their lives now intertwined in a way neither had anticipated. The routine of their days had shifted. Every movement felt scrutinized, every word weighed. Ilara found herself constantly glancing out the window, searching for any sign of Barrett and his men. Nolan, too, felt the pressure mounting. He had shared his story with Ilara, revealing the circumstances that had led him to flee into the mountains. He had been part of a gang, but he had turned against them when he realized the depth of their cruelty. Now he was paying the price for his choice to leave. "I never wanted this life," Nolan confessed, one evening as they sat by the fire. "I thought I could escape, but I've only brought more trouble to you." Ilara shook her head, her determination unwavering. "You didn't bring this upon us, Nolan. Barrett and his riders are the ones who thrive on violence. You deserve a chance to make things right." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You've shown me kindness when I least expected it." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. In the midst of the chaos, they had formed a bond that transcended their circumstances. But as the days turned into nights, the tension only grew. The riders remained vigilant, their presence a constant reminder of the danger lurking just outside their door. Then came the day of reckoning. Ilara awoke to the sound of rustling outside the cabin. Her heart raced as she exchanged a worried glance with Nolan. They both knew that the riders were closing in, and the time for confrontation had arrived. Alara stepped outside cautiously, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the sight before her. The riders had gathered in a semicircle, their horses stamping impatiently. Barrett stood at the forefront, his expression unreadable. "Enough games," he called out, his voice carrying across the valley. "It's time to settle this once and for all. You've made your choice, Alara. Now you must face the consequences." Alara's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, her voice steady. "I stand by my choice, Barrett. I won't let you harm an innocent man. You can't justify this violence." Barrett's eyes flashed with anger, but there was also a flicker of respect. "You're braver than most I've encountered, but bravery doesn't change the facts. You've put yourself in danger by protecting him." "I'd rather face danger than live with the guilt of betrayal," Alara replied, her voice unwavering. "Nolan deserves a chance to live. You're not a judge, Barrett. You're a man driven by vengeance." The riders shifted restlessly, and Alara could sense the tension in the air. She knew that her words carried weight, but she also knew that they could lead to dire consequences. Barrett regarded her for a long moment, and then he turned to his men. "What do you say, riders? Should we let this girl's foolishness dictate our course?" A murmur rippled through the group, and Alara felt her heart sink. She had hoped for a moment of understanding, but it seemed that the riders were not swayed by her conviction. "I'm not afraid of you," she declared, her voice rising above the murmurs. "I'm not afraid of what you might do. I believe in honor, and I believe in standing up for what is right." Barrett's expression hardened, and the atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation. "Very well, Alara. If you're so determined to protect him, then let's see if your conviction can withstand the test." With a swift motion, he signaled to his riders, and they began to form a tighter circle around Alara and Nolan. The tension escalated as the riders closed in, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and hostility. "Let's see what you're made of," Barrett taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can protect him? Prove it." Alara's heart raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. This was no longer just a test of words, it was a test of strength and resolve. She had to stand firm, not just for herself, but for Nolan as well. "Do what you must," she said, her voice steady, "but I won't let you take him without a fight." Barrett's eyes gleamed with challenge, and he stepped closer. "You're willing to risk everything for him? You're a fool." "Maybe," Alara replied, her heart pounding in her chest, "but I refuse to let fear dictate my actions. I stand for what I believe in." The riders exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of intrigue and skepticism. Alara's heart raced as she felt the weight of their scrutiny. She had to prove herself, not just to Barrett, but to the entire gang. "Enough talk," Barrett said, his voice low and menacing. "Let's see if you can back up your words." With a swift motion, he signaled to his riders, and they began to close in on Alara and Nolan. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and Alara's heart raced as she prepared for the confrontation ahead. But just as the riders advanced, a loud shout echoed through the valley. "Stop!" The voice belonged to a newcomer, a man on horseback who rode in from the direction of the mountains. His presence commanded attention, and the riders halted, confusion etched on their faces. "Who are you?" Barrett demanded, his voice laced with irritation. "I'm here to put an end to this madness," the man replied, his voice firm and resolute. "You don't need to do this. There's a better way." Alara felt a flicker of hope as she recognized the man. It was a member of the local militia, someone she had encountered during her time living in the valley. He had always been a voice of reason, advocating for peace among the settlers and the native tribes. "What's this?" Barrett sneered, his expression darkening. "Another fool trying to play the hero?" The newcomer dismounted and approached Alara and Nolan, his eyes filled with determination. "You don't have to face this alone. We can find a solution that doesn't involve violence." Alara felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with relief. "We can't let this escalate into bloodshed." Barrett glared at the newcomer, his anger palpable. "You think you can just waltz in here and dictate terms? This is between me and them." "No," the newcomer replied, his voice steady. "This is about all of us. We can't let vengeance dictate our actions. There's too much at stake." The riders exchanged uncertain glances, their resolve wavering. Ilara seized the moment, her heart racing with hope. "We can find a way to resolve this without violence. Let's talk." Barrett's expression shifted, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "You think words can change anything?" "Yes," Ilara said, her voice filled with conviction. "Words can change everything. We can choose honor over vengeance." The tension in the air began to dissipate as the riders hesitated, their expressions shifting from hostility to contemplation. Ilara felt a glimmer of hope as she realized that perhaps there was a way out of this conflict after all. Barrett regarded Ilara for a long moment, and then he turned to his riders. "What do you say? Are we willing to listen?" One by one, the riders began to lower their weapons, their expressions shifting from anger to uncertainty. The atmosphere in the valley began to change, and Ilara felt a sense of relief wash over her. As the dust settled, the newcomer stepped forward, his voice steady. "Let's find a way to move forward together. We can't let our past dictate our future." Ilara glanced at Nolan, who looked at her with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. They had faced the storm together, and now, perhaps, they could find a way to forge a new path. As the riders began to disperse, Barrett's expression remained inscrutable. "You've got guts, girl. But remember, not everyone will be as forgiving." Ilara nodded, her heart still racing. "I'm willing to take that risk. I believe in honor, and I believe in standing up for what is right." As the sun began to set over the valley, casting a warm glow across the landscape, Ilara felt a sense of hope. They had faced unimaginable odds and emerged stronger together. The choices they had made would shape their future, and she knew that they could find a way forward, united in their commitment to honor and justice. In that moment, Ilara understood that the journey was just beginning. She had chosen a path of courage, and with Nolan by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The valley, once filled with darkness, now held the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And as they stood together, Ilara knew that they had the power to change their fate. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment on what you would have done in their place, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next tale from the frontier.